You swear last Christmas was a few months ago, but it wasn't. It was a year. Somehow the years keep getting shorter, and you're the only one who's noticed. Ask a 7-year-old how long summer break feels, and they will tell you it feels endless. Ask an adult the same question about any given year, and they will tell you it felt like nothing. Like it slipped through their hands before they had a chance to notice it was happening. Most people assume this is simply about being busier, more responsibilities, more to think about, less time to sit and stare at the wall the way you did as a child. That explanation feels right. It is also incomplete, because the years aren't actually moving faster. The Earth still orbits the Sun in exactly the same amount of time it did when you were 7. Nothing about the physical passage of time has changed even slightly. What has changed is something happening entirely inside your head. To understand this, you have to start with a strange fact about how your brain actually measures time. It doesn't use a clock. It uses memory. Here's what that means. Your sense of how much time has passed isn't generated in the moment. It's reconstructed afterward, based on how many distinct memories your brain filed away during that period. A week, packed with new places, new people, and new experiences, gets logged as dense, memory-rich time. A week that looks exactly like the week before, and the week before that gets compressed almost into nothing. Your brain essentially skims over it because there was nothing new to record. This is where something strange starts to happen. When you're 7 years old, almost everything is new. Your first day at a new school, the first time you tried a food you'd never had, a street you'd never walked down before. Every single day is loaded with firsts, and your brain dutifully files all of them away in vivid detail. That density of memory is what makes a single summer feel like it stretches on forever. But here's something researchers didn't expect to find when they actually measured this effect. Psychologist William Friedman, who has spent decades studying how humans perceive the passage of time, found that the speeding up sensation isn't a smooth, gradual process the way most people assume. It doesn't slowly creep up on you year by year in a straight line. Instead, it accelerates sharply during specific life stages, and then it can actually stabilize, sometimes for years at a stretch, before shifting again. That alone should make you pause. If this were simply about getting older, the sensation would be steady and predictable. It isn't, which means age itself isn't really the variable doing the work here. So what is? This is where the research takes a turn that changes how the entire question should be framed. A team of researchers studying what's now called the holiday paradox found something almost backwards from what you'd expect. A vacation filled with new experiences feels like it flies by while you're living it, moment to moment. But when you look back on it weeks later, it feels like it lasted far longer than a routine week at home, even though both periods were the exact same length in real time. In other words, time feels short while it's happening and long in retrospect, specifically because of how much new information got packed into it. Your brain isn't timing the experience as it occurs. It's evaluating the experience after the fact based on how full the memory folder turned out to be. This is the moment everything reframes. Time itself was never speeding up. What was actually shrinking was the density of new memories your brain had to log. Think about what childhood actually looked like from your brain's perspective. Nearly everything was a first. Now think about an average adult week. Same commute, same desk, same 15 minutes scrolling the same 3 apps before bed. Familiar isn't bad. Familiar is efficient. But familiar is also nearly invisible to the part of your brain responsible for marking time as having happened at all. If you've ever felt time slipping away faster than it should, you're not imagining it, and you're certainly not alone in noticing. Here's what makes this discovery sit differently than you might expect. This isn't a flaw in your brain. It's not something broken that needs fixing. Your brain evolved to flag novelty because novelty, for most of human history, meant something worth remembering. A new water source, a new threat, a new path through unfamiliar terrain. Routine didn't need to be remembered in detail because routine, by definition, posed no new information your survival depended on. The problem is that modern adult life is structurally built around routine, optimized schedules, predictable commutes, the same 4 walls, the same 15 people, the same loop, repeated until the loop becomes invisible. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when a year disappears. It's accurately reporting how little new information it had to file. And this reframes a question most people never thought to ask in reverse. It isn't really, why does time speed up as you age? It's, why was childhood so saturated with newness in the first place? And what happened to that saturation? Researchers studying this effect, including neuroscientist David Eagleman, have found that the brain's perception of duration is directly tied to the amount of neural processing required to take in an experience. New, unfamiliar situations demand more processing. More processing creates a denser memory trace. A denser memory trace, recalled later, reads as more time having passed. It's not a metaphor. It's closer to a literal accounting system, where memory density is the currency time gets measured in. So the answer was never about getting older at all. It was about how often your days stop requiring your brain to pay close attention. If your brain has ever made an entire year vanish without explanation, you're not imagining it, and there's a reason it keeps happening. But there's a second layer to this that researchers didn't initially expect, and it complicates the simple novelty equals time explanation in an interesting way. Psychologist Mark Whitman, who studies subjective time perception, found that the speeding up effect isn't purely about how many new events occur. It's also tied to something called proportional time, the idea that each year of your life represents a shrinking fraction of your total lived experience. A year at age 5 is 20% of your entire life. A year at age 50 is 2%. Mathematically, that single year is objectively smaller relative to everything that came before it. And some researchers believe your brain registers that proportional shrinkage, even without consciously calculating it. This complicates things. If proportional time were the whole story, the speeding up sensation should be smooth and mathematical, gradually compressing decade after decade in a predictable curve. But that's not what the data actually shows. Friedman's research found periods where the sensation stalls, plateaus, or even reverses slightly, especially during major life transitions. A move to a new city, a new job, the birth of a child. People going through these transitions often report that time temporarily slows back down, even well into adulthood. That detail matters more than it first appears. If proportional time alone explained the effect, a 40-year-old moving to a new country shouldn't experience any slowdown at all. The math wouldn't care about new experiences, but the slowdown happens anyway, which means novelty isn't a side factor here. It might be the dominant one, with proportional time acting more like a background amplifier than the actual mechanism. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it means something quietly hopeful. If the primary driver really is novelty density rather than the simple math of aging, then the sensation isn't a fixed, irreversible slope. It's not a countdown you're powerless against. It's closer to a pattern your environment has fallen into. Researchers studying memory consolidation have found that the brain doesn't just record more during novel experiences. It also revisits those memories more often afterward, strengthening them through repeated recall in the days and weeks that follow. Familiar routine days don't just get logged thinly. They often don't get revisited at all. There's nothing distinct enough about them to trigger spontaneous recall, so they fade not because they were forgotten exactly, but because they were barely encoded as anything worth remembering in the first place. Think about how strange that actually is. You lived through that Tuesday. You were fully present for it, technically. But if nothing about it stood out, your brain treated it almost as if it hadn't happened at all, at least in terms of how it gets weighed later when you try to account for where the year went. Here's where this becomes less about explaining the problem and more about understanding what it reveals about being human. Your ancestors didn't live in a world with calendars, clocks, or birthdays marking the passage of time in fixed units. Their sense of time was built almost entirely from memory density, the same system you're still running today. A season was long if it was eventful. A season was short if it passed without incident worth remembering. There was no abstract concept of a year going by too fast. There was only the felt density of what had actually happened. In some sense, the sensation you're experiencing now isn't a malfunction of modern life layered on top of an otherwise perfectly tuned ancient brain. It's that same ancient brain, doing exactly what it has always done, just operating inside an environment that has become unusually repetitive by historical standards. Your ancestors' days were rarely identical to each other. Weather changed, food sources shifted, threats and opportunities varied constantly. Sameness, real sustained sameness across days and weeks and months, may be one of the more recent inventions in human history, even though it now feels like the default setting of adult life. So the answer was never about getting older at all. It was about how often your days stop requiring your brain to pay close attention. You swore last Christmas was only a few months ago. It wasn't a glitch in your memory, and it wasn't a sign that something in you has changed for the worse. It was an accurate report from a brain that simply didn't have much new to log between then and now. The years aren't actually getting shorter. Your days have just been quietly asking less of your attention, one familiar morning at a time. And somewhere in that quiet repetition is the only thing that was ever really slipping away.